WCW/NWO Revenge is a sequel to World Tour. This is a critically acclaimed video game that was released in 1998. I am looking forward to playing it because I've heard so much about it. This game needs a little warning. I have a used copy, and the previous owner altered a few of the wrestlers, so a couple of the names are basically the people who owned it and their friends. It's one of the quirks of getting a used copy like this, but yeah, it's kind of fun. It adds to a little bit of the history of where this game came from. The gameplay is very good. The control system is easy to learn. It's easy to do all the moves. The controls are just great. Getting the counters and reversals down, it takes a little time, but you can get through the game without learning any of them. If you try the multiplayer, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult, especially if you're playing with people who know what they're doing. But just in time, you get everything down, and it's just an easy game to get into. It has a really great roster, but there is something that I kind of need to expand upon. I mentioned it earlier, but when you play this on the N64 and not on an emulator, then you'll run into some of the edited rosters where somebody will have changed the name of a wrestler to be their name, or one of their friends will have done it. It's just something you need to accept when you're playing a used copy of the game. It was kind of funny. I don't know who the characters actually are supposed to be in some cases, but it was just one of the quirks of getting a used game. It's really fun to see what somebody does with it, and just seeing which character they obviously liked or which character they didn't like and wanted to replace with themselves. It's really cool. This doesn't detract from the quality of the game, and it just reminds me of renting games back in the 1990s. Back then, you might run into a game where the previous renter had made some changes to it and had all of the save spots, and maybe they changed the name of the character to Do Not Delete or something like that. That was where my mind went when I was playing this, or at least when I saw that part. It also kind of applies to the memory card that you're using. If you get a used memory card, you might find some weird stuff like that. This has a battery save, so you don't really have to deal with that, or at least not with a memory card, but you still have to deal with somebody changing the names of the wrestlers. There are a ton of game modes here. I spent most of my time in the championship mode because that was about as close to a career mode as I could get. And yeah, it's really great. It really was. It's more of a gauntlet match than anything else, where you're working your way up to a championship belt. It's kind of fun. It reminds me of a few arcade games, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a really wonderful experience playing this. There isn't really too much else to this game. If you get a group of friends around, then you can do the multiplayer, and that's a lot more fun than just the base game. You could say that with every wrestling game, though. This is an easy to learn but difficult to master game. It is an upgrade over the previous WCW game, and yeah, it's kind of the last really good WCW game. Mayhem was average, and then the others are just bad to almost unplayable. So this is really where I should have just stopped with the WCW games. For a game released in 1998, it looks pretty good. The wrestler models don't look that different from the previous game. I think they look a little bit better in some cases than WWF Warzone, but the textures overall are just very blocky. This is really the only criticism that I have with the game. Everything else is just nitpicks. The ring entrances look great. It's such a simple thing to overlook, but when you're going through all of these different wrestling games, it kind of stands out when they're not there, or they look bad, or they look really repetitive. In Revenge, they look much better than in games like WCW Mayhem, which I thought they looked alright, but they got pretty repetitive. Here, they look really good, and I'm just glad that they're there. The character models are a little dated. They're really the only weak part for the graphics. I don't really see this as being a big deal because the animations look very good, but just, yeah, the character models are a little blocky. There was one, like, very minor thing that I wanted to point out, and this is just letting everyone know how far I had to go to find something to say that was even remotely bad about this game, and that was the turnbuckles on the ring. They look pretty bad. They just look like a triangle. Everything else looks good for the time, but those turnbuckles, it's like, okay, those look out of place. They couldn't have, like, rounded those out a little bit. Because even with the character models, they were able to kind of smooth those out, round them a little bit. And then you look at the turnbuckles, and it's like, that's weird. That's really how far I had to go to find something where I'm like, okay, that's the only thing I don't like about the graphics. Despite the somewhat dated look of the wrestler models, I think this game looks terrific. It would have looked good at the time it was released. It looks better than some of the 3D games that were released at that time. It's not as good looking as like Attitude or Mayhem, but it does have certain points in it where, okay, that looks better than what Mayhem did, or that looks better than what WWF Attitude did. I think the move animations are better, the character models aren't as good, and yeah, the ring entrances are better. I think this is a better game than both Mayhem and Attitude. So, yeah, take that for whatever it's worth. I really like the way this game looks. Before I get into this, I just want to point out that the scoring system in the late 1990s and early 2000s was a little different from what it is now. Back then, a 5 was considered an average game, and a 7 was considered good. Anything higher than a 7 is considered great. I probably should have pointed this out earlier, but it really starts becoming apparent when you look over the scores for WCW NWO Revenge. Like the other times, I took 4 reviews for this game. GameSpot and N64 Magazine gave it the lowest scores with a 7.2 and a 7.5 respectively. And then Nintendo Power and IGN gave the game an 8 and an 8.1. So that's kind of where we are right now. I hate to pick on N64 Magazine, but when they write things like it's an improvement on the predecessor, but it's still nowhere near the giddy heights of WWF Warzone, I can't really ignore that. I mean, I really like Warzone, but I'm just to go ahead and admit it, it's nowhere near as good as what Revenge is. The reviewer knocked the blocky graphics, which is understandable, but man, they are just, I don't know what they're doing sometimes. It just sort of reinforces a lot of these games. They care a lot more about graphics than they do gameplay, especially back in the late 90s and early 2000s. GameSpot's major complaint was the things that the developer didn't improve, so the stuff they just didn't do with this game over the previous one. I can kind of understand that, but I'm not sure it knocks the score down that much. Yeah, these are just opinion pieces, of course, but I don't really get that. Just, it seems a little odd to me to do it that way. Nintendo Power Score, it's the aggregate of 5 reviewers. I kind of like this approach a little bit more because then you get more opinions than just one person on this. The reviewers focused on the improved graphics over the previous game and how the game's just really easy and fun to play. This is something that I noticed. It's very easy to play, and yeah, I kind of agree with this assessment much more than what N64 Magazine and GameSpot said. The review for IGN is really good. Whenever the reviewer suggests that if you own World Tour, go ahead and sell it so that you can buy this one, you know they really like the game a lot. The reviewer praised just the game's update from the previous one, but mentions that the graphics are not as good as some of the others that are on the market, like WWF Attitude and, or Attitude wasn't out yet, so Warzone at the time. Fair enough, but I'm glad that they point out that the gameplay is really good. It seems like every reviewer agreed that this is a good to great game, in that it is an improvement over World Tour. But yeah, the dated graphics seem to have held it back a lot, and it looks like they just put more weight on the graphics at the time. It's interesting to see what the reviewers focus on when you go back and look at these older reviews, and I'm sure that none of them expected some jackass to go back and read these after like 30 frickin' years. But hey, here I am. This was great. Playing a great game is just so much more fun than going and playing something that's just nearly unplayable. Prior to playing this one, I had played Nitro, and man, that was horrible. Games like this make me wish I had played more N64 games growing up. I really rarely played the system. I was mostly just playing on the PS1 because that's what most of my friends had. And usually when we got together, we would play some party game on the N64. Like sometimes we played Mario Party, but most of the time we played, I think, GoldenEye and Mario Kart. And then after that, we all just graduated high school and went our separate ways. I don't really have anything else that I want to say or probably need to say about this game. It's great. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.